glad to be able to share with you tonight the history of stagecoaches in Santa Barbara County and give you a little stagecoach tour of the West as we travel from a little bit of Southern California up to Santa Barbara and then on to Mattei's Tavern. I've been at the Carriage Museum for 25 years, taking care of the collection there. And now I'm happy to have my son with me to take care of this when I get done with taking care of the museum and being there. It's always been a problem over the years, worrying about, you know, what's going to happen to this collection when you retire. So my son, Dylan, you want to share a little bit with us?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming and listening to us. Again, my name is Dylan Peterson. I work at the university. I'm an academic coordinator. I run the biology labs. And as you all know, we're online out there as well. And so I've been on the computer for the last 8 months trying to do science. And I've also been enjoying the museum, doing a lot of stuff on the side, including this, getting this presentation together. So I hope you all enjoy our Stagecoach Tour of the West.
Yeah, we've done this, the Stagecoach Tour of the West several times at the museum for the Westerners and several different groups before we came to the lockdown. We also started doing a Stagecoach Tour of the West back in 2001. Our first person to do that for us was James Nottage. He was the curator of the Gene Autry Museum and came to Santa Barbara in 2001 and put together a Stagecoach Tour of the West. Since then, we had Doug Hansen, who is from Lecter, South Dakota, has done some restoration for us. And then John Crockett, who was a curator of the San Ynez Carriage Museum up there. So we have a little history in this. Hopefully we have some information that you'll enjoy. Behind me is a picture of Joel Fithin driving a stagecoach that actually belonged to the Santa Barbara Historical Museum there, and we have it on loan from them. It was about 1930 in the Fiesta Parade in Santa Barbara. It's interesting to see the people on the roof there. I don't think we could do that today. And the young fellow wearing a coat and tie riding a bicycle down the street, which is kind of neat. Dylan, you want to share your photo there with us?
Yeah, I have a picture of the Arlington Hotel that was where the current Arlington Theater is. It's a 90-room hotel. This picture is approximately 1888, 1889, and the hotel was built by Colonel Hollister, among other investors here in Santa Barbara at the time. One of the bigger names coming out of the hotel at the time was Dixie Thompson, which we'll speak a little bit about later. And he's one of Santa Barbara's key players in the Stagecoach days there.
Yeah, Dixie Thompson was a guy that ran the hotel for Colonel Hollister, and Colonel Hollister just told him, he said, give them what they want. And that's what Dixie Thompson did, and it became one of the finest hotels in Santa Barbara. There's a long story about a saddle that he owned that was made by Loomis Saddle Company here in Santa Barbara that actually sold. It was made in 1889 and sold a couple of years ago at an auction for $190,000. We didn't have $190,000 to buy it, so obviously we don't have that saddle today. But anyway, yeah, Dixie Thompson was a great guy, ran that hotel, and everybody wanted to stay there. So we'll get on to the Stagecoach Tour of the West here, and for exactly 40 years, from 1861 to 1901, stagecoaches traveled the roads of Santa Barbara County through Gaviota and through Lompoc and up to Los Olivos and Los Alamos, and then on to San Francisco. We have a slide. There we go. This is a Henderson stagecoach. Henderson is in Stockton, California. And this coach is called the Los Alamos Stage and was given to the Carriage Museum by the Luton family. Bill Luton owned KUIT and some radio stations in town. His family, Brandy Branchino, and Bill Luton Jr., who doesn't live in Santa Barbara, was on the board of Old Spanish Days for years, and Jackson. Anyway, so this stagecoach was used on Rancheros Visitadores for years and had some restoration work done to it. But when we got it, it needed a full restoration, so we sent it up to Doug Hansen in Lecter, South Dakota, and we put quite a bit of money into it. But you can see today it's beautiful. It's built in and say 1850, but Henderson didn't start till 1863, I think it was. So, but it's beautiful. It's on display at the Carriage Museum today. Dylan, you have some?
No, you covered all that one pretty
Yeah,
good.
just jump in when you think of something.
Yeah, of course.
Got
Yeah.
some luggage on the top that we had added to the Stagecoach, and it's in the museum today. So we can go to the next slide. This here's a Saga stage, and that's also Henderson, and that was restored by Doug Hansen also. These coaches were in need of restoration. You know, there's a thing in museums today that you want to be careful about, you know, the restoration and preservation, that you want to preserve, you know, what you can of the real Stagecoach as it was in the day. But, you know, over the years, you figure these were made in around 1860, and you know, a lot of things happened to them. They've been a lot of places. They've done a lot of different things. This stage went down to Saugus, picked up the mail. And you have some information about that, on Dylan?
Yeah, we'll get to this when a little later in the talk when we head around Rincon corner.
Yeah, as they waited for the tide to go down at the Rincon, because the causeway wasn't built until about 1911, I think. But they waited for the tide to go down. They beat it around the corner, went to Saugus, picked up the mail, and came back. And if they didn't get stuck, then they didn't get robbed.
Exactly.
But you know, again, another Stagecoach that's you know, on display at the Carriage Museum.
What I really like about this stage is we kept the original U.S. mail panel. You can see right above the Santa Barbara to Saugus panel. That's the original paint and the original colors that the Stagecoach originally was. Yeah,
the first Stagecoach was made in about 1760, and that was actually a covered wagon. And then again in 1901, when the railroads came through, that the Stagecoaches died. The picture behind me, that Stagecoach that I talked about earlier, that's made by Abbott and Downing. Abbott and Downing was the premier stagecoach maker. They were called Concord Stagecoaches because they were made in Concord, New Hampshire. The one behind me is a mud wagon, like the one that you see on the screen right now. And mud wagons were made for outlying areas like Santa Barbara. The roads were rougher. It was cheaper to make them. They were lighter. And there was a lot of big pluses to have a mud wagon rather than a full Stagecoach with the doors and the windows. So in 1903, when the commercial stagecoach travel ended on San Marcos Pass in 1901, and Joel Fithian and this fellow, Mr. Underhill, decided that they were going to give people stagecoach rides up San Marcos Pass. And they had a building built, and they could change horses when they got to the bottom of the pass and then go up San Marcos Pass. But it was a long travel, even during the commercial days from 1861 to 1901. San Marcos Pass was built in 1868. And so it was an 8-hour trip from the Arlington Hotel, or the hotel on Haley and State where they originally started. And it took 8 hours to get up there. And you know, today people go, I don't want to go to this, it's a little far for me to drive. But anyway, it's just interesting today. There are 130 probably Concord Stagecoaches left today in existence. Ken Wheeling of the Carriage Association of America, I had a visit with him. He came out to Santa Barbara and viewed our collection years ago. And he says there's about 130 of them left today, out of all those Concord Stagecoaches that Abbott and Downing made. He's seen 129 of them. The other two are in I think he said 131, but anyway. Here's another slide.
Here we have the touring wagon, which would you could use to load a bunch of people on, and you would tour them around Yosemite or other large parks like that. It was an open top, kind of a viewing wagon. You can see here, this one was actually in Santa Barbara for a long time. It was owned by Silsby Spalding, the Tecolote Ranch. And you can see on the left here is a slide of him getting ready to go through Fiesta, probably about 1930 or so. And he has a 6-up team, a couple guys on the saddles. That's probably him on the right with his parade saddles that we actually have on display at the museum that you guys can come see as well. And this picture on the right is also the same wagon that he used on his ranch in Winchester Canyon. You know, and the Tecolote Ranch was, would you say it was 1,400 acres? Is that right?
1,430, yep.
Yeah, 1,430 acres.
Yeah, it looks
Spanning
like
from-
an Easter picture of, you can see the ladies all dressed up in white there, and they're
Yeah,
going to Easter church outfit there. But Silsby, they live pretty large out there. He was an oil man, and his ranch went from the back of Winchester Canyon, where all those houses are down there today, and went all the way to the beach where the Bacara is.
Yep.
And he had a house down there right on the beach in those days, and they sold the ranch in 1959, and then they've developed the property over the years. But the original house is still back there at the back of the canyon.
yeah.
This the wagon itself, back to that touring wagon, is an Abbott and Downing mountain wagon called the mountain wagon, and that's what they used in in Yellowstone and the big parks before they had the buses. So this is how they got around to tour the Yellowstone and that then. And that again, I don't know if did you get that picture today?
Yeah, I didn't get it on the slide though.
Okay. Yeah, we have a nice, that wagon also was restored by Doug Hansen in Electric, South Dakota again. It needed some restoration because it was kind of rotten away a little bit on the sides and things. So they did a fantastic job of putting it back together the way that it was new interior and a nice paint job. And that too is on display at the Carriage Museum. So when you get a chance to go down there after this is over here, we had to close again because we're gone to purple again, I guess. So anyway, got another slide.
So you want to go with this one?
Go ahead.
This is a picture of some Rancheros Vistadores members doing a reenactment crossing the San Ynez River. And is this the Luton Stagecoach here that they have?
No, that's actually it's a Henderson that we have in storage. It's not on display.
Oh, okay, that's the one up in storage.
They use it on Rancheros, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So this was probably like 1960s, and this is just a nice example of some guys trying to reenact old stagecoach days of the West. The young man on the horse that's about entering the river there is Jody Young, and he's a fairly famous artist. He was a apprentice to Charles Russell, and we have some of his work in our museum, as well as the Santa Barbara Historical Museum has many of his actual paintings. I don't know if they're on display, but they do have some, and they're beautiful works of art.
Yeah, Jody Young, all he wanted to do was be a cowboy all his life. He got meningitis when he was a young man. And so he couldn't hear, but he became a good Western artist. There's a lot of his work around Santa Barbara, and we have a diorama. It's called, there's a stagecoach and 6 horses that he made for Silsby Spalding in 1932. And we have the original letter from Jody Young that he gave to Silsby Spalding when he made the diorama. And it was on display at the Tecolote Ranch, and then went to their ranch in Hope Ranch until 2011 when they donated it to the museum. Now it's on display. So this is the first time it's ever been where the public could see this. It took Jody Young 1,500 hours to build that stagecoach you see in the diorama. So when you see it, it's just unbelievable. It's very nice. He did a great job. Dylan's going to take us on a stagecoach tour of the West coming up here. So we get the next slide. We had Pule Hauser come to Santa Barbara a few years ago, and I think it still might be on the internet, and kind of did a little tour of the stagecoach days in Santa Barbara. He didn't come to the museum, did a tour of the museum, but they went to Arlington. We took the Los Olivos stagecoach. We have that actual stagecoach, another Henderson in the collection that hasn't been restored, but it sat in the courthouse up until about 1990 when it came to the museum. They donated the museum because they didn't want the courthouse anymore. But he did that kind of the driving around. So there's 53 signs, and I don't know if you've noticed it through Santa Barbara, all you Santa Barbara people, that Wells Fargo, this group got a grant together from Wells Fargo and had 53 different signs made of all the kind of different stops and places along the way. All the way, from the Arlington Hotel up to Hollister and then over to Fairview, I think it goes, and then up Old San Marcos Pass. But there's none on San Marcos Pass. Caltrans wouldn't let them put any on there at all. So then until you get to 246 over to Edison, where the old College Hotel was on the corner of 246 and Edison is the other one. And then there's few as you go down Edison along to Mattei's Tavern. So, and those are great. There's little tidbits of information about the whole thing. So if you're driving along, you get a chance to stop and check them out. They're really nice. And the group that put that together did a really nice job. They're top quality signs and a lot of great information.
Yeah, the map on the left here is the route that we'll be taking. We're going to start in Los Angeles and make our way to Los Olivos. You could buy a ticket from Los Angeles all the way to San Francisco, which is what this red line on the map illuminates. And as I said, we're just going to go all the way up to Los Olivos, which would be about a 2 to 3 day journey. And the Stagecoach parts were just some reference for the viewers to kind of get familiar with parts of the Stagecoach. And most of the Stagecoaches were made to order, where they would actually come in parts, and they'd be put together and around the area that you would be using the coach. And we can go to the next slide if you want. Some examples of some Stagecoaches, again, that we have in our collection. The one on the right is it's the Abbott Downing Stagecoach. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is a mud wagon that belongs to the Historical Museum.
Yeah, so the type of Western Stagecoaches you'd see would be the Concord Stagecoach that we talked about, and the Western mud wagon. The Yosemite type of wagon was also a Western mountain wagon that was considered a touring wagon.
Yeah, and the one on the left there is the Los Olivos coach that actually went from the Arlington to Los Olivos, and it was made by Henderson. It's also a mud wagon too. Yep.
Next slide. Again, just some text to talk a little bit about the stage teams and the type of teams you would have, and they were often referenced by the number of horses you had, 2 up, 4 up, or 6 up team pulling the stages, depending on how much cargo you were carrying, how many passengers, the type of wagon. All these were these would dictate how many horses you would have. Often you would have stops on these long journeys, about 10 to 20 miles apart, depending on the type of terrain, but most of the time it was right around 15 miles before your horses would need to be either changed or rested and watered. So we go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about the Stagecoach drivers. They were known as the Jehu. Is that correct? How you pronounce that?
Jihas. Jehus. Yeah, they were the Stagecoach driver. This particular picture is selling Camarillo, and it's a great story. He was the last Stagecoach driver to drive a Stagecoach commercially on San Marcos Pass. Again, the mud wagon to the right of him is the one that belongs to the Historical Museum, and I believe that picture was taken because he died in 1957. So that was taken, had to have been probably in the barn at Fifth Inns, because he worked for Joel Fifth Inn. Joel Fifth Inn wanted to teach him how to drive, and he said he didn't want to learn how to drive. He didn't want to drive horses is all he wanted to do. But we have his whip that was given to us, and one of his great grandsons called me one day, and he says, I have a whip that belonged to one of the Stagecoach drivers. I said, who is that? He says, selling Camarillo. I says, oh yeah. I said, yeah, come on down. So he brought it down. He brought some spurs and some stuff. We started walking around the museum, and I showed him our bit collection. He said, well, I think I have one of those bits. So he brought us a bit that belonged to the selling Camarillo that he actually used, that actually Mardueño made. Mardueño is a famous bit maker here in Santa Barbara County. And it was quite a piece. Plus the whip itself was really nice. It's a buckskin lash on it, and they're 11 to 12 feet long, and then the hickory stick on it's about 5 feet long. But it's the actual whip that he used when he drove a Stagecoach back in the 1800s. A funny thing is that when I asked Robert that brought the whip to us, I said, how long you had this stuff? He said, well, my great aunt gave it to me in 1989. And I'm going, wow, that could have ended up at a garage sale. But we have it today, and we also have a whip that belonged to Ted Whitney, another famous Stagecoach driver.
So I believe Celine was one of the last drivers to go over over San Marcos Pass. If that was correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we'll get into the actual tour of the West here. So this is actually a ticket that was issued in 1872 in Los Angeles to get to Santa Barbara on July 11th. And looking at prices around then, they would charge you about 10 cents, around 10 cents a mile to get from point A to point B. And then of course you do the math to figure out how much you'd have to pay. It's about, would you say about 90 miles, 100 miles up from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara. So that would cost you probably about $10 or so to get from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara in the stage in around the 1880s. This is Flint and Bixby Stagecoach line ticket. They were one of the first stagecoach companies to actually come up over the pass. And Mr. Bixby was essential in construction of San Marcos Pass, and we'll get to him in a little bit. So here we go. So like I said, we're going to start the stagecoach journey in Los Angeles and end in Los Olivos. The journey will take us up the old Kings Highway, also known as the El Camino Real. And again, it's highlighted in red here on the left in this picture. This would take a several-day journey with many, many stops along the way, with overnight rests and trading out many horses throughout the journey.
Yeah, it was back in, from St. Louis to San Francisco, it was 25 days to make that trip, and it was a couple $100. So it's a short trip here from LA to San Francisco. How many days was that? Do you remember?
From LA to San Francisco?
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't say offhand. I know it's about 3 days from Santa Barbara, or from LA to Los Olivos.
Yeah.
I would say it's at least a week that you're on this journey. And here we go. So this again, just some slides talking about the El Camino Real, the Butterfield Overland Stage Route, which was established in 1858 as a contract to a guy by the name of James Thompson. And he was contracted by the Army to build a new road that would bypass Gaviota. So that would come up from Los Angeles to Los Olivos, going through Santa Barbara and San Ynez. And that road was started in 1858 and it was completed in 1862. And the Butterfield Mail Company was the first company to use what were called the good roads to deliver mail, transport passengers. But many other stage lines used it, like the Old Coast stage line that was owned by Llewellyn Bixby. And here, this is the Bella Union Hotel, which was the first stop. Or it's not the first stop. This is where you'd be picked up in the 1870s. This was in LA on Main Street. And like I said, the Bella Union Hotel, it was owned by the mayor of the town, and he sold it in 1856. And then it was, a second story was built, and it had a very fine dining restaurant. So you could stay the night there, have dinner, wake up in the morning, and head on out up to San Francisco if you needed to go that far. But like I said, today we're just going to head all the way up to Santa Barbara. And so, go to the next slide. So this would be our first stop, which is Rancho El Encino, which is in the San Fernando Valley. So leaving the Bella Union Hotel, this is about 21 miles north of Los Angeles. It's a 2,400 acre ranch that was owned by Vincent de la Osa, and it was open to the public as a way station in 1860s for passing stages. This, like I said, would be the first place you would stop. You wouldn't actually spend the night here, as it was only probably about 3 or 4 hours outside of LA by stage. You'd stop here to rest, you'd water the horses, and just really take a nice rest and get ready for the next 4 or 5 hours of journey. You can see in this slide here, that street right in front of them is actually Ventura Boulevard, which is still around today. Okay, here after leaving the El Encino, your next stop would be was through the Conejo Stage Road, and this led up through the San Fernando Valley, following the old Kings Highway, the El Camino Real, and passing through ranch after ranch. There's just free roaming cattle everywhere because there was no fencing at the time. Barbed wire wasn't invented until 1867, but it wasn't readily available until probably the turn of the century. So you'd have free roaming cattle all throughout these nice pasture lands in the San Fernando Valley. You can see the Mission San Fernando here on the right. Our next stop is in Calabasas. Here we have the actual Calabasas post and store that was used by the stagecoach passengers and drivers. Here, Calabasas is a cool little story. They roughly translated in Chumash, it means Valley of the Wild Pumpkin. In 1824, they say a carriage carrying a bunch of pumpkins toppled over. Many of them broke open. Seeds were strewn about. And the next year, there was wild pumpkin patches all around, or known as Los Calabasas. And it was known also as the place where the pumpkins fell. And actually, this ended up being one of the roughest and toughest stops along the way. There was a dance hall and a saloon in the same building. And located next to the saloon was the Calabasas jail. And behind the jail was a very large oak tree that no prisoner ever wanted to meet. Okay, so here's the Stagecoach Inn. The Stagecoach Inn is our next stop, and that's in Newbury Park. It was originally the Grand Union Hotel, and it was a first-class establishment which provided fine accommodations, along with fishing, shooting, and most of all, bathing. The hotel changed many hands throughout the years, and it was even moved once to build the freeway. And after it was moved to build the freeway, it was renamed the Stagecoach Inn. The building actually still stands today, and it's a local museum, and it's designated as a California Historical Landmark 659. And this would probably be the first place that they would actually spend the night at on their way up to Santa Barbara. They'd head out early the following morning. So here's the Camarillo stage stop. And so this, of course, came after Newbury Park. Heading north, you come into Camarillo. And the city, before it was named Camarillo, was called Springfield. And it had a post office, a church with just a few other buildings. It wasn't very large at the time until the Camarillo family came in. And they bought and owned Rancho Caligas, which stretched from the Conejo Grade westward all the way to Lewis Road, if you're familiar with the area. You can imagine how large that is. This included part of Camarillo Springs and the Santa Rosa Valley. The family, they're farmers, and they were integral in bringing Camarillo to life. They donated a lot of land to build schools and parks, and they also allowed the railroad to pass through their property, which actually led to the downfall of Springfield. Adolfo was one of probably the most famous Camarillo fellows. And he was well known for his Camarillo horses that we see in equestrian parades today and here in Santa Barbara. In the Fiesta, we've seen them many, many years. If you want to speak about the Camarillo horses at all.
Yeah, he still breeds, well, he doesn't, but those horses are still around. They still come to the Fiesta parade from time to time. Adolfo did ride with the Rancheros Visitadores, and there's lots of pictures around him riding with several of his white horses with him, the Camarillo horses.
And so heading north, you'd soon enter San Buenaventura, as it was called at the time, which is now just Ventura County. And this is where they had to traverse the Rincon corner. And this was probably one of the most difficult and time-consuming stages of the trek north. As we mentioned earlier here, they'd have to use the beach to make their way to Carpinteria. The beach was covered with rocks, and the tide was rough. And the tide would come all the way up to the cliff. So drivers had to wait until the tide would drop, and then they would try to hurry their way past this corner. It was a well-known stop for bandits because you could even sit there for a few hours waiting for the tide to drop, and you could be relieved of your jewelry and your money, and maybe even the Wells Fargo stage safe box. Like I said, or like my father mentioned earlier, the Saga Stagecoach, which we have, was used often and traveled this route in the 1870s. If you want to mention anything about Rincon Corner.
Yeah, that's it. You know, they talk about the stagecoach robberies when we get to Hobo Rock and Slippery Rock. A lot more information about that there.
So after Casitas Pass was developed and opened in about 1878, the Rincon route was largely abandoned, to the delight of Wells Fargo, but to the aggravation of the bandits. Stagecoach drivers had a lot easier way coming around the Casitas Pass than they would Rincon Corner. It was a causeway that was built, which was essentially just several piers that were put together over sand and earth. And the trip from Carpinteria came through Summerlin, over Ortega Hill, and through Montecito, and it ended up around the Bird Refuge, Cabrillo Boulevard. They would head upstate and then head their way over to the Arlington Hotel. Before getting to the Arlington Hotel, they could stop at the Shepard Inn. It was James Shepard. He owned a large ranch in Carpinteria, and when the new route was made, it passed just about 200 feet from his property line. So he took advantage of that new route that these stage travelers were traveling, and he would actually cook a pit barbecue, and then it turned into a fine dining establishment after a little while, and it was a destination for wealthy aristocrats at the time. In the early part of the 20th century, there'd be a daily carriage ride from the Arlington or the Potter Hotel that would take you down to the Shepherd's Inn and get you either lunch or dinner.
Yeah, the Shepherd's base is still there today, and still part of that family that actually ran that Shepherd's Inn. There's still some shepherds that live up that way.
Yeah, you'd have big time celebrities like the Roosevelts and Vanderbilts would be itching to get some pit barbecue while they're here in Santa Barbara. And so now we're going to kind of start in the Santa Barbara area. We're going to head our way up over the pass here. We're going to start at the Arlington Hotel. As I said, this would kind of be the beginning of the journey from Santa Barbara up to Los Olivos through San Ynez. The hotel had become the unofficial center of Santa Barbara around the 1890s, largely because of Colonel Hollister employing Dixie Thompson as the hotel manager at the time. His slogan was keep your customers happy, or keep your customers comfortable, your guests comfortable. And that was his big reason for success, was he paid attention to the guests.
And people know Sam Stanwood, who was a county supervisor responsible for quite a few things that have happened in Santa Barbara. And when Sam Stanwood was 14 years old, he worked for Dixie Thompson and had a ranch there up in Alomar, and had about 125 horses, and was able to supply Dixie Thompson and some of the people that came to Santa Barbara with horses and wagons and things like that to go around town.
Yeah, Stanwood was the El Presidente for, was it 40 years, I believe, for Fiesta?
Yes.
And he also was, he was around at the turn of the century, so he saw automobiles come into play around the city, and him being a horse rider and a trail man, he realized that the trails could actually be turned into roads, and he was one of our county supervisors that suggested to start building roads here in town. And so he's largely responsible for a lot of what we have here in town today. We actually have one of his saddles also at the museum that you guys can come down and take a look at.
It belongs to the historical museum, and we have it on loan. And it's a Visalia saddle, very nice.
Yeah, beautifully engraved. Has his initials carved in the cantle in the back. It's a really nice saddle. So next here is another picture of the Arlington Hotel with a stagecoach ready to take off in the morning. As we said, Dixie was the main proprietor of the hotel in the 1880s, and he would make sure the guests were comfortable. As we said, he'd set these stagecoaches up and get them ready for the travelers. After they spend the night, about 8 a.m., they'd come out front. There'd be a stagecoach waiting for them. They'd all jump on board and head on their way up to Los Olivos, to eventually to Mattei's Tavern. This slide is the one we have behind Tom here. And this is also no, you're right. Go forward. Next slide. Yeah, this is a Joel Fithian Abbott and Downing stagecoach that was used in Fiesta. We just wanted to show this slide because, as we said, Santa Barbara, State Street and the Arlington Hotel was really a main focus of the town, maybe even the town center, if you say. And, this being State Street, this is a Fiesta parade in the 1930s. With, as I said, Joel Fithian's Abbott and Downing stagecoach there. So here, the San Marcos shortcut, or it was called at the time the San Ynez Turnpike Road. It was financed by several wealthy Santa Barbara men. Over San Marcos Pass, the crest at 2,200 feet, and the individuals that were in kind of the brainchild for making this road were Samuel Brinkerhoff Road here in town. He recruited a banker, Charles Fernald, landowners as Colonel Hollister and the Dibley brothers, Judge Charles Hughes, Ed Renall of Wells Fargo, and Llewellyn Bixby of the Coastline Stage Company. They originally built San Marcos Pass as a toll road. They thought this would be able to pay off their investment using it as a toll road. You'd save several hours by bypassing Gaviota and coming over the pass. The toll road was to be run by a fellow by the name of Patrick Kennevan, which you may or may not have noticed, Kennevan Road at the crest of San Marcos Pass. And we're going to speak about him here in a few moments. So the stagecoaches, they leave the Arlington, head up State Street, and then take a right on Turnpike Road, head up to Foothill, and then head up Old San Marcos Pass. Here we just have some old vintage pictures of San Marcos Pass. People actually traveling on there on their way up. One of the first notable features that you would pass through on the way up Old San Marcos Pass was slippery rock, known to the locals as Slippery Sal. It's a feature that's still around today. I think it's on private land, so the public can't just go check it out. But it was these ruts and grooves that were carved in the stone by Chinese laborers. The laborers were there to build the pass, and they felt that this was an easy way to help horses up the grade here. So they would, carve these grooves for the horses that would allow them to get a better purchase on the ground there. And you can see also in the picture on the left, you can see actually there's two sets of grooves. The first original one began getting too deep and would start to damage the hubs of the stagecoaches, so they shifted to the right there a little bit and were able to make new ruts. Do you want to say anything about Slippery Rock?
Yeah, Slippery Rock and Hobo Rock was where they had most of the stage robberies there, and during those days, they a lot of people think that they robbed the stagecoach most of the time, and not so much Santa Barbara County, but stagecoaches in general. They were robbing them for the strong box that sat underneath the driver who was carrying, and they thought all the loot might be in there, but they were actually robbed because of the salesmen that used to travel by stagecoach. The reason why they call them stagecoaches is because they went from one stage to another stage to another stage. Commercial stagecoaches were painted red and yellow. So when you saw a stagecoach coming in red and yellow, then you knew that it was a commercial coach and they were waiting for the coach to come. But they were robbed mostly because the salesman dealt in cash. So he went to the general store, picked up the cash from the last order, took the new order, and so he had all that cash on him, and that's why the stagecoaches were robbed, for the salesmen that were on there. Most of the time, they robbed them for the strong box too, but that was part of the reason.
So here, as you mentioned just a few moments ago, is Hobo Rock. This was one of the first resting stops on the way up the pass. It was a nice shady area with some flat ground. And it's a 40
anymore today.
Yeah, it's a 40-foot cube of a shale rock that was dislodged millennia ago, tumbled down San Jose Creek, and came to its resting spot, which is where current Hidden Valley Ranch is. Like I said, it was a comfortable spot to rest, and also a comfortable spot for bandits to hang out and wait for the salesman to come by. They'd hide in the brush and attempt to rob the coach there. The rock was actually demolished in 1963 to build the current San Marcos Pass there. You can see this is a nice, beautiful picture of Hobo Rock with the little stagecoach resting there in the lower left of the rock. It's just a nice little picture of, again, some area between Slippery Rock and Kennevan Road. You'd transversing the pass, you would come to several flat areas, and it was hard on the horses, coming up here. So they would often, kick some of the guys off the stage and make them walk right next to it to alleviate some stress on the horses. And this would be one of those places that would happen.
Yeah, they were the stages were built on, and the mud wagons were built on thoroughbraces. Thoroughbraces are strips of leather, so the stage body of the stage kind of sat in this little bucket effect. I think Mark Twain had mentioned one time that it was like riding in a bathtub because it rocked so much, But it was sitting there making the ride a lot smoother than it would have been sitting on springs.
Right. You can head to the next slide.
The Slippery Rock, that's still there today. That's goes from you can get to it from the top of, well, you can't get to it, it's on private property today, but There was a place called Windermere Ranch that had it years ago, and I was able to see that about 15 years ago. I actually got to see it. But
Yeah, I've yet to make my way up there.
yeah.
So here we got Pat and Nora Kenovan at the summit of San Marcos Pass, which is about 2,200 feet up. We have Kenovan Summit Station, which was run by Pat and Nora. Pat was born in Ireland in 1834, and to escape the life of a coal miner, he came to America and settled in Texas as a cowboy driving longhorn cattle. He then joined the Union and fought in the Civil War as a cavalry lieutenant under General George Meade. After the war, he moved to California and was employed by the Flint Bixby Stage Company. Him and his wife ran the Summit Station. They collected the tolls and tended stock horses for the stagecoaches to exchange out.
That's why it's Kenovan Road up there at the top of the pass today too. I've probably seen that driving up there.
Here we have some pictures of the Kenovan House. It was well known as a great place to grab an afternoon meal, change out your horses from the Arlington. They would arrive around noon, so about 4 hours after departure. Nora prepared all the food, and she never charged for any meals, but she left an oak bucket out in front of the door, and guests would leave a free will offering, was what it was called. So she actually never asked for any money from anybody, but that paid off quite handsomely. And over the 30 years that she supplied travelers with food and beverage from their ranch and the orchard, she was actually never taken advantage of. She was never robbed or swindled or anything like that. And that probably is because she made one of the best peach pies out in California. And so after your rest at Kenovan, you'd have a nice meal. You'd start heading down the north side of the pass. And your first stop again would be to rest the horses at Cold Spring. It was originally a crisp, cool spring that flowed crystal clear out of the mountainside, and it was sluiced down into hollowed out logs so the horses could drink. Again, it was about halfway down the north side of the pass, and it was a shady, pleasant place to stop and have a rest. As you can see, these 4 individuals here sitting on the side of the spring here, they kind of reflect probably what it felt like riding on one of these wagons for days at an end. Probably had about 12 cents in their pocket and just happy to stay warm. So the romanticism of the stagecoach days is probably a little blown out of proportion.
Yeah, it was they say a romantic time to live in those days, but people don't realize how tough life was then. The driver of the stagecoach here was Ted Whitney's father. Ted Whitney drove stagecoaches on San Marcos Pass also, and this is his father driving this stagecoach here.
So this is a Cold Spring Tavern as it is today. It was first built to house Chinese workers that would help build San Marcos Pass at the time. And it was abandoned after the pass was completed until about 1870, when, of all things, a Frenchman moved in and he opened up a ballet school and tried to have students come up to trek to San Marcos Pass to learn ballet. But by the time they got to the school, they were just too tuckered out to even try. So the school failed pretty rapidly. After it was closed, there was a short time restaurant that opened that was called the Hermitage. The owner was arrested for murdering his wife. The restaurant then closed until it was moved, and then a few decades later reopened in the current location it is today as the Cold Spring Tavern. It's a popular gathering spot, especially on Sundays. You get a lot of bikers that come by, and they make award-winning tri-tip sandwiches that's actually been featured on the Food Network. So after leaving Cold Spring Tavern, you head down the rest of the mountainside until you got to San Ynez River, and you cross the river into the sleepy little town of San Ynez, which was founded in 1888. The town had a minor bloom in the late 1800s with the assumption that the railroad line was going to be built through there. That never happened, so the town kind of remains a small but popular town today.
Yeah, this picture on the right's the follow-up picture of that river crossing we just saw earlier with Jody Young in there, and the picture of the stagecoach that belongs to the Carriage Museum. But this again is a rancheros ride, and they're crossing the river here, going up to their next stop.
Here's a small little picture of San Ynez back in the early days before it actually became anything significant. You can see it almost looks like a little town out of the third episode of Back to the Future, a classic Western town. We have a bunch of stagecoaches here, and you can see the amount of people piled on top of that one stage there. I don't know if that would be very safe to do nowadays, but they give it a try back then, that's for sure. Okay, here we have a college hotel in San Ynez. The town, like I said, was pretty small, had a post office, a general store, but the college hotel was erected in 1889. This is a beautiful looking hotel. It cost about $30,000 to build back in the late 1880s. It became a stagecoach stop twice daily, once leaving San Ynez and once arriving. It's just a magnificent looking building for the time. So coming up to the end of the stagecoach tour here from San Ynez, our next stop, final stop, was going to be is at Mattei's Tavern in Los Olivos. Mattei's Tavern is run by Felix Mattei. He was born in 1853 in Switzerland and came to San Francisco at the age of 15. Him and his family then traveled down the coast and ended up settling in Los Olivos. They purchased a small home in 1886, which would end up being next to the terminus of the railroad. He saw potential and set up shop. They built a 7-room hotel and a restaurant, and it became very successful. The other hotel in the area was actually burned down right after he built his hotel, and he had a virtual monopoly in his business, just flourished. Many people made the trek to Los Olivos via rail and stagecoach throughout the years. There's legendary bird hunting in the area. And looking at the registrar of the hotel, it's filled with plenty of famous names, Pillsbury's, Vanderbilt's, and even Susan B. Anthony stayed at Mattei's Tavern. Apparently she was kind of a pill, is what I've been told. Los Olivos continued to prosper and eventually replaced the Gaviota Wharf as the shipping hub for the area. Stages stopped running the pass in 1901, ending the romantic but not so comfortable days of the stagecoach travel. And that sums it up for our stagecoach tour of the West. We've headed all the way up from LA to Los Olivos. Probably, would you say, about 120 miles or so over a period of about 3 days?
Yeah, for sure.
And probably a lot of sore rear ends after that.
Yeah, they had a list of travel tips for passengers when you're riding on a stagecoach, and they've been published around in different Walker Tompkins book that's available at the library. Stagecoach Days in Santa Barbara has a lot of interesting information if you're interested in. It's a paperback book, but it's got a lot of good information about Santa Barbara County and Stagecoach Days, and then Walker Tompkins. I don't know how many books that he wrote, but he wrote quite a bit about Santa Barbara, and he donated all that stuff to the library at UCSB. So Dylan was able to go over and get a lot of things that we have. We have a display, an exhibit of sorts at the museum today called a Stagecoach Tour of the West that has a lot of the pictures that you see here today and more. And then, of course, you can see all the stagecoaches that we've restored that we have on display. That mountain wagon that was in that last picture there we're pretty much know that probably belonged to the one that Salisbury Spalding bought, not for sure. But some of the travel tips they have, that abstinent from liquor is preferred, but if you have a bottle, pass it around and don't forget the driver. And they talk about not to sleep on your neighbors because it's rude. But anyway, then that's published also in that book too. But there's a lot more information on stagecoaches, but we wanted to give you a little tour that we put together, and I think it's some great information. There's some if you have some questions, I think Michael is monitoring those questions there, and we'd sure like to hear from you if you have some questions. And don't forget to come down and visit the museum. We're also grateful to the Santa Barbara Historical Museum. We have probably 6 or 8 saddles, maybe 9, that we've been able to borrow from the museum. Some belong to Dwight Murphy and some other prominent people in Santa Barbara. So we have a great relationship with them, and we're happy to be able to do our little stagecoach tour of the West on your Zoom calendar, and we appreciate that.